Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first of many shows. I want to introduce straight away, I'm going to get straight into it, UKIP's former MEP for the East Midlands, Roger Helmer.
Hello, Dan. Great to be with you.
Yeah, well, welcome aboard, sir. Welcome aboard. Well, we've got the purpose of these shows, Roger, as we've briefly talked before we came on air, is to highlight the importance of what you guys did, what you went through, that the amount of work that you put into, you know, pushing the country to vote to leave the European Union in 2016. Because let's be honest, if it wasn't for UKIP, we'd still be in there now. You know it, I know it, and millions of other people know
Absolutely
it.
True.
So first of all, let me thank you on behalf of the millions that voted to leave the European Union. And let me start by, asking you, you were a successful businessman. Am I right? When did you join the Conservative Party? What made you get into politics and why?
Well, I had an interest in conservative politics going way back. I graduated from Cambridge in 1965, and I can remember around that time, well, I went straight to work for Procter & Gamble in Newcastle on Tyne. I can remember campaigning in local by-elections up there, Blythe Bridge and places at that time, and canvassing on behalf of the Conservative Party. But I didn't have any position in the party apart from being a volunteer and an activist. And then in the rest of, the next 30 odd years of my career, I spent many years overseas, so it was a bit difficult to be involved. And even when I came back and was settling into the UK, I joined the local party. I think the highest office I'd held was of a committee member in a branch, not a constituency, a branch committee. So I was sympathetic, I was interested, but I wasn't by any means making a career of it.
Right. As a former committee member myself at branch level and branch chairman, I have to say there was quite a lot of work involved, in my experience. I find it interesting though that you made the jump from the Conservative Party to UKIP. What made you do that?
Well, I think we can probably thank the euro for that. I'll never forget how it all happened. If you remember in those terrible days, where are we? We would have been 1997, I think. And all the talk in Britain was how we were certainly going to have to join the euro. And it was really important for business and finance and everybody who might be involved to get used to the idea of joining the euro and make our preparations so that it was all going to be successful. And I remember in my capacity as managing director of a textile business in Leicester, I was invited to go to one of these conferences. I think the chairman of the conference was a local bishop, and there were lots of trade unionists and civil servants and do-gooders and people of that kind, and a fair smattering of business people at this conference. But as I was driving to it on my way, I was listening to the Today program. Of course, that's what you do. I still do. And there was a little news snippet saying that a group of Conservative members of the European Parliament had come back from Brussels to London to ask, I think it was William Hague was the leader at the time, to ask William Hague to be more positive about the euro. And frankly, I was genuinely shocked. And as I like to say, I nearly drove my car into a tree. But when I recovered control of the vehicle, I said to myself, who the hell are we sending as Conservative MEPs to represent us in Brussels? So I went on to this meeting, and it was fascinating because all the people up on the platform were talking in terms of how positive it was and how we needed to get on with it and all those things. And then there were questions from the floor. I think it was just before the coffee break. And I got up and made my little pitch. I said, you're all talking as though this is something we want to do and is good for us and we ought to be getting on with. But do you appreciate there are an awful lot of people out there, including quite senior and experienced economists, who think actually it's an extremely bad idea and we'd be much better off staying out. And I was gratified. I can't say the audience was on its feet behind me, but there was a sufficient sort of ripple of applause from a limited number of people, but to show there were at least people in the room who took the same point of view. Of course, there were gasps of horror from the Europhiles there. But then we had the coffee break. And I got chatting to one guy over a cup of coffee in the coffee break about this whole issue. Turned out he was the Conservative chairman of the Conservative Euro Committee at the time in the region. And I said to him, "Oh, this is very interesting." I said, we ought to be sending reliable people to Brussels. How do you get on the list? It was just a question that occurred to me at the time. It wasn't a plan. Well, he said it's just the right time because there's about a year before we get into the selection process, which would have been about July 98, and then you've got the election itself in 1999. So I think that was the point where I said to myself, I better go and do this. And it was an interesting little tactical exercise, given that you've been a member of the party, but not at any level where anybody would have noticed you. How on earth do you get yourself into a position of being an MEP candidate? And I realized that the first stage of selection actually was the Euro Committee itself, which was primarily constituency chairman from across the region, plus a few agents and one or two other people. And I thought to myself, what I have to do is really get stuck in with one constituency chairman, because at that very first meeting, they're going to have hundreds, maybe 1,000 paper applications from people who'd like to be an East Midlands MEP. All I wanted was one guy who was in the meeting to pick up my piece of paper and wave it and say, "Hey, I've met this guy. He's been working hard in the constituency. We really ought at least to talk to him." That's all I wanted in stage one. And so I did a lot of work in my local constituency, spent a fair bit of time with the local constituency chairman at the time. And sure enough, in that first selection meeting, I was on the long list of people they would at least interview to start with. After that, of course, it's how you get on in the interview. And I remember the final meeting, the last selection meeting, which was a full day in Nottingham. And all the hopefuls were there, including a guy called Bill Newton-Dunn, you may remember, who was, I think, the only candidate who'd actually been an MEP before, but was an absolute committed Euro lovey. However, he thought he was going to win, no trouble at all. He was the only one with experience, all these newcomers that nobody had ever heard of, so he was certainly going to win. I gave a speech that I really worked hard on. You know the old Churchillian thing, that every minute of speech needs an hour of preparation. Well, I think I did over 3 months beforehand. And I remember I had a 5-page speech, carefully timed. And in the middle of the first page, I said something along the lines of, "I've got huge respect for career politicians, but I really think the time has come when we need to send people to Brussels who have actually run businesses and hired people here in the East Midlands." And to my astonishment, they all applauded. In fact, I had a real timing problem because I got a very positive reaction from then on. I had to drop the penultimate paragraph of my speech and almost miss my big finish because, of course, they're very strict with the timing and they cut you off dead if you go over time. So I had to get it in. But anyway, one way or another, I managed to get to the top of the list ahead of Bill Newton-Dunn, and I think he resented that for the rest of our short relationship.
So when was this?
This was 1998. I think the selection meeting was July. The final selection meeting was July 1998. And the election was 1999. So I was an MEP not only across 2 centuries, but across 2 millennia.
Well done for that. You look very good for it, Roger.
Thank you very much.
So how long did you serve as a Conservative MEP before you made the switch to UKIP?
Well, actually, quite a long time, 13 years, I think, because I was elected in 99. And I moved across in 2012, and that too was a very interesting saga. Can you spare me the time to tell you about it?
Well, it's funny because my next question is, how did your switch come about?
Well, all the way through, the Conservative group of MEPs had been divided between the Leavers and the Stayers. Indeed, we had 2 different dining clubs on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, I think, where the Leavers would get together at one dining club and the Remainers would get together in the other one. And of course, I was in the Leavers group, which was rather the smaller of the group. But I was deeply unhappy with the way things were going. And I remember in those days, people in UKIP, because I talked to a lot of people in UKIP, and they say, come on, Roger, you're really one of us. Why don't you come across and join us? That's where you really belong. And I would say, yeah, well, we're in opposition. You wait till we've got a Conservative Prime Minister, and we get a Conservative Prime Minister, and he'll really sort out this European thing. And of course, then we got a Conservative Prime Minister, and he didn't sort out the European thing.
Who
So anyway,
sorry, Roger, who was that? You said they got a Conservative Prime Minister.
That would have been, when did Cameron come in? I get confused over dates, to be honest, at my age, and there's an awful lot of history there.
My point was that Cameron wasn't a Conservative.
Well, indeed, yeah, that would have been my only defence, I guess. But I thought anyway, I'd done my bit. I must have been late 60s at the time. And I thought, well, I've gone past 62, which was the old retirement age, past 65, which is the sort of standard UK retirement age. I thought I'm perhaps ready to retire and not very happy with the way the Conservative Party is doing. So I prepared to retire. And the next guy on the list from the previous, that would have been 2014 Euro election, was a guy called Rupert Matthews. You probably know him. He's now, I think, a police commissioner. But he's a thoroughly sound man. And I would have been very happy to leave the Parliament and let Rupert come in and effectively take over my seat. I had people afterwards criticizing me on Twitter saying Helmer thought he could decide who his successor would be. But of course, I didn't decide who my successor would be. My successor was decided by the selection process and by the Conservative voters of the East Midlands. And they had chosen Rupert as the next guy on the list. And Rupert had worked damn hard in the election campaign, and he thoroughly deserved the position to which he had been elected. However, Baroness Varsi, who you may remember, she's now, yes, Baroness Varsi, she was then the co-chairman of the Conservative Party. She took against Rupert for a number of reasons. He was a man, he was a Eurosceptic, he was heterosexual, he was not disabled, all those things. There was absolutely nothing you could point to that said, oh, well, here's a good guy to represent a minority group of some kind. But above all, he was a Eurosceptic, and she didn't really want Eurosceptics in there. And I started to hear rumours saying that Varsi was planning to drop in a candidate of her own from London rather than Rupert Matthews. So I started contacting her office to just check what her plan was. And frankly, one thing that infuriated me, she never responded to me personally. The best I ever got was emails from people in her office. But their basic position was, you haven't resigned yet, so there isn't a vacancy, so we're not prepared to discuss the succession. And I said, I'm afraid, I'm not going to proceed with this resignation unless I have this reassurance. And I wrote a very strong letter at one point saying, I will consider that all my responsibilities to the Conservative Party have been carried out and that I am no longer responsible to the Conservative Party, which in political speak is as near as you get to saying, I will quit and go somewhere else. I had in any case intended to quit at the end of 2011. I was going to lie fallow for 2 or 3 months, and then I was going to go and join UKIP because I thought I will leave my seat. I was elected as a Conservative. I'll quit from the seat and I'll then go and join UKIP and see what I can do to help. But when Varsi started playing silly games with the whole thing, I thought, well, okay, I won't resign. I will go and join UKIP as I had planned at their spring conference, which I did. But I will remain as a member of the European Parliament. So, and I'm very glad that I did, because of course, the next election, 2014, UKIP did spectacularly well. And so there I was back for another term. And very, very gratifying too.
Well, it's funny how one incident can lead to, completely change somebody's path politically, as obviously, yours, you were already looking at UKIP, but Baroness Varsi gave you a little nudge and helped you cross the floor, shall we say?
Absolutely, yes. And I'm very glad that she did. I understand that she got herself into terrible hot water because I had a number of friends amongst the Conservative MPs who sat on the 22 committee, of course, they knew roughly where I was and roughly what I was thinking. And they knew damn fine that if she'd handled it differently, it might have worked out.
Yeah.
In fact, I understand that she phoned Lord Callanan, as he now is, who was a leader of the Conservatives at the time, and she said, if she'd seen the headlines in the paper, she said, if we give Helmer what he wants, will he stay? And he said, quite rightly, if you'd said that a week ago, the answer would have been, yeah, of course he will. But now that he's made the announcement, he's gone public, it's in the press, no, he won't. So there we were. And she took some real stick at that next 22 committee meeting because people felt that she'd quite unnecessarily wasted a Conservative MEP that she could have kept on board.
Your time within the European Parliament for both the Conservatives and UKIP, you know, you proved yourself time and time again. We've got some videos of some speeches that I'm going to play later on, where you proved you know all the work and how resourceful and how capable you were. So it was a massive loss for the Tories, but a massive plus for UKIP. So when you jumped from the Conservatives to UKIP, how did you find the cultural difference? The reason I ask is for a very short time I was a member of the Conservative Party after I left UKIP, and it just wasn't the same. You know, I've been to a Tory conference; it just wasn't the same. I don't know whether it was me or, but it just wasn't. I found it very stuffy. I found it very UKIP. All the UKIP events I used to go to were always natural. You had a vast array of different people from, you know, all over Europe as members of UKIP, something that the mainstream media kept very, very quiet. But how did you find the culture jumping from the Conservative Party to UKIP?
Oh, well, I very much as you've described it, Dan. It was much less straight-laced, much more casual, free-flowing, and much easier, really, to get things done, I think. I mean, I was very gratified. My first full day with UKIP, after I'd arrived at the grand ball the night before in Skegness, Nigel said to me, "You've done a lot of work on energy, haven't you?" I said, "Yes, I have." And he said, "We haven't got an energy spokesman. Would you like that job?" Which was absolutely wonderful, and it's not quite the way these things are handled in the Conservative Party, but that worked terribly well. I mean, some of the Conservatives, you have this strange divide between many of the members who are great people and actually would be very comfortable with UKIP if they were in UKIP, and the leadership who are much more sort of reserved and frightened. They were frightened about the EU at the time. I remember, for example, in the last Conservative conference before the 1999 election, that would have been the 1998 October conference, I was invited as a candidate. By that time I was a candidate, but I was not elected. I was invited to speak to the Conservative Party conference. And while I was again thinking what to say and how to engineer the speech, a quotation from Shakespeare came into my mind, and I decided to plagiarize it a bit. And I remember at one point in my speech, I said, "I have a message for our friends in Europe. We will walk with you, talk with you, buy with you, sell with you, but we will be damned if we will be governed by you." And the whole place erupted. I think I got the only standing ovation other than official platform speakers in the whole conference. But I, of course, infuriated the EU powers that be. And there was an Irishman who was the sort of head honcho for the EU office at the time. He was at the Conservative Party conference. I remember we went to a reception, a European reception hosted by the German ambassador. And this Irish EU guy sort of buttonholed me. In fact, we shook hands and he wouldn't let go. He dragged me by the hand across the room saying, "I'm going to take you to the German ambassador. We'll see what he has to say about your performance today." I was astonished by his behavior. When I got to the German ambassador, he was a man of absolute charm, and we had a very pleasant conversation.
It's very interesting listening to you, because as a grassroots, you know, door knocker, leafleter, which is pretty much what I did for most of my 6 years or 5 years in UKIP. It's always interesting to understand what UKIPers went through in the wolves' den of the European Parliament. So in the build up to the 2014 EU referendum, obviously UKIP were riding high in the polls. I think up until 6 weeks before that election, they were tying with both Labour and yes, I know polls. You can make a poll, say what you like, but they were level. UKIP was level pegging with both Labour and the Conservatives, and something happened in the last 4 weeks in the build up to the 2000, and UKIP just leapt. What do you think that was? I mean, at one point, I'm just looking at the dates now. In the last 21 days in the build up to the 2014 EU referendum, UKIP knocked on 30% in the polling. 30%. Labour 21% and the Conservatives 22%.
We had a big machine, the ground game, as people like to say, in terms of politics. So yes, that was working well. I think though there was sort of a realization amongst the public and amongst the voters that while the Conservative Party was expressing concerns, yes, we know it needs reforms, lots needs to be done, that was the old story and it didn't take us anywhere. And to be honest, I can't remember what Labour was saying about Europe at the time, but I think they were more positive about Brussels than the Conservative Party was. And there was nobody except UKIP saying, we've had enough of this nonsense and we want out. And I think that cut through in the last weeks before the election. I'll never forget that election night because I was watching the figures on the screen in the East Midlands. And frankly, the only sort of nail-biting bit was who was going to come second. Because right from when the results started coming in, UKIP was clearly ahead and stayed ahead all night. Whereas Labour and Conservative were absolutely neck and neck. And the way the PR system works, it only took Labour to have one more vote out of a million to get the extra seat, or Conservatives equally one more vote out of a million to get the seat. So it was absolutely critical who came second and who came third. But meantime, we UKIP guys were standing back and letting them fight it out because we'd won.
Yeah, the establishment would have really taken note of that, and I think we can see. I joined UKIP in 2015, and even in my short time within, I could see the way I understood the way that the media worked, and it completely changed in that year, 2015, because you had the general election. UKIP got 3.9 million votes, if I remember correctly. In the general election, they've won the European elections before that. So the mainstream media and the establishment, as far as I'm concerned, went on steroids with regards to trashing UKIP. With everything, we were aliens from another planet. Anything, absolutely everything. But you guys went on, and then the rest is history. We're now out of the European Union.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, they ought to have noticed the results of those previous elections and seen them in the context of a referendum. Well, I'm glad they didn't, because if they'd understood where it was going, they wouldn't have done the referendum, would they?
Yes.
But they still thought they could win a referendum. And to be fair, they nearly did. It was a fairly close result. But surely they realized there was a significant risk that Leave would win, as indeed it did. And that's what they didn't fully take into account. And
David Cameron and the 1922 committee realised that the amount of pressure within their own party for a referendum was coupled with the results that UKIP was getting. I think it was the pressure from within the Conservative Party that it was that. I mean, you had Douglas Carswell, Mark Reckless, jump ship. These were very worrying times for the status quo. So I do think that Cameron was getting a lot of pressure from within, as well as the pressure that UKIP was giving electorally.
Yeah, very much so. And Cameron actually was in sort of a rather difficult place because he decided to give a referendum because he thought that would draw the sting of Brexit and Euroscepticism. But of course, it opened the possibility that we, the bad guys, would win. And blow me down, we did. It was just extraordinary. The extent of prejudice against UKIP among large sections of the population, though, were actually worrying, and it still exists. I still get stuff on Twitter.
Yeah.
You UKIP, so you must be a racist.
Yeah.
And if I may contribute a rather personal little story, my fiancée, as you possibly know, is from an ethnic minority. When we first met, we got on quite well and chatted, and then conversation turned to, well, what do you do for a job, as it does on these things, first date. And I said I was a UKIP MEP. And she wasn't sure whether to run out then or stick around.
Is she still looking for the door now?
Vaguely surprised that to find that a UKIP MEP actually wasn't a racist bastard after all.
Yeah, it was very much. I mean, you know how it is. If you say, if the media say a lie enough times, it becomes the truth.
Yeah.
I can remember my first UKIP event. I came with a friend before I actually joined UKIP to a conference, and it just blew me away. I had no experience of political conferences, and everyone was so friendly. I met Iraqis, I met Kenyans, I met Eastern Europeans. It just completely was not what I was what the mainstream media was saying. I didn't really believe them, but yeah, I joined straight away. Yeah, the rest.
Well, that was exactly my fiance's experience, because I took her to a conference and she went with some trepidation, thinking, well, maybe Helmer's not too bad, but what about all the others?
Yeah.
And came away saying, what an absolutely great crowd of people, what really nice folk.
Yeah. I've made some lifelong friends, that are grafters. People, they never ask for anything. Just UKIPers that travel all over the country, for a by-election because they believe in the cause. I think that was one of UKIP's major strengths, and that was why I believe Patrick O'Flynn coined the phrase "the People's Army."
Yeah. Well, very much so, and thank heaven that we actually delivered a result. That all those guys worked their socks off, worked their shoe leather off, and well done. And you and I, Dan, have done a fair bit of knocking on doors and delivering leaflets and all that stuff. But we can look them in the eye and say, okay, you worked hard, but by golly, we won. And really, that's what counts, and that's what makes it all worthwhile.
Absolutely. I've got so many friends that I think about quite a lot, real characters that passed away and didn't make. They didn't get to see the referendum result. One guy, Bill McCabe, lives in the same constituency as me, knows Nigel personally, a Glaswegian, hard as nails, a real grafter, and unfortunately fell ill and died, really very quickly. But there was only about 2 or 3 weeks for the vote. I was, but there are stories like that right across the country, and I want to thank them and everyone else that helped us get that result, because we're out. It took us 4 years to get out, but we're out.
Well, I was like some other people. The actual night of the results, I was down at there was a party at Millbank, and we were all there. That was a party that Nigel was at, and we had a slight wobble and thought we'd lost. Being very elderly as I am, and having had a few drinks, I really couldn't stay up any longer. So we went off to bed, thinking that we probably lost it. And I sort of vaguely woke up about, I think 5 o'clock in the morning, had a quick look at my Twitter account, and we'd won. And it was just such a wonderful surprise and delight. And I immediately pulled myself together and started taking media bids. But it was a super time.
It was, that night will, that night. Well, it'll go down in history, and
it will live in history. Yes.
Yeah, one of the things I want to do these shows and highlight what you guys did in the build-up, but not just for UKIP, but as your time in the Conservative Party, obviously still fighting for the cause, and then you jump ship. But one of the I want to show a couple of videos, if I may. You had a little verbal soiree with our former Prime Minister Tony Blair back in 2005. Let me just play this video and give me your thoughts on it afterwards.
Now, Mr. Helmer, Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Prodi tells us that we should be developing biomass, but of course he must have seen the reports that show that the actual emissions.
A technical blip there. Let me select the correct video. That's the next video I want to show. Tony Blair.
Mr. Helmer for 2 minutes.
Mr. President, when the Prime Minister came to Strasbourg in October, I told him he had come to survey the shattered wreckage of his European dreams. Little did I realize then quite how comprehensive that wreckage would be. It is bad enough that he has failed to deliver the ambitious reforms which he promised in June. But as a British Conservative, I am appalled by the way he has failed our country and failed my East Midlands constituents. Early this year, Prime Minister, you boasted that the British rebate was not on the table, period. Then you put it on the table, and you boasted that you were the first Prime Minister to do so, but only in exchange for radical reform of the budget and the CAP. Now you are selling it in salami slices with nothing in return but fool's gold and vacuous promises. No wonder that Gordon Brown has said, "No one believes a word you say anymore." Britain's favourite newspaper, The Sun, says Tony Blair is to surrender billions of pounds of taxpayers' cash and get nothing in return. In its editorial of December the 1st, it said, "This is treachery." Treachery, Prime Minister. Not a nice word, not my word, The Sun's word. But I and millions of Sun readers agree. You are giving away a huge sum of money simply as a fig leaf for your failure. But it is not your money. It is not the government's money. It is our money. It is the taxpayers' money. They tell me, Prime Minister, they tell me that you are concerned about your legacy. I can tell you what your legacy will be. You will be remembered as the man who squandered Margaret Thatcher's legacy.
I have to say, a lot of the videos that I've watched for you today, that one I really enjoyed.
I enjoyed looking back on it, actually, Dan. Thank you for showing that one. Yeah, it was great.
What was it like in the European Parliament whilst Britain were, while we had the presidency under Blair? What was it like?
Well, we got a huge range of reactions. There were quite a number of MEPs, mostly from other member states, but some British MEPs as well, who thought we were crazy, who thought we were mad, who thought we were letting the country down, who thought we were destroying the future of their European dream. Indeed, we were destroying the future of their European dream, and they were quite hostile. There were others who were still supporters of the European project, but at least understood our concerns, understood where we were coming from, were extremely courteous and charming. You would happily have a cup of coffee with them and chat about things. And indeed, often with particular pieces of legislation, it almost didn't matter. I mean, I certainly took the view that as long as I was there, I was trying to mitigate the damage. And if there was some bad European legislation, we would seek to pass amendments that made it a little bit less bad, which seemed to be a worthwhile thing to do. And on some of those, you could cooperate with the others. But the other thing, of course, was that there was a smaller group of committed Brexiteers, mostly British, but not entirely British. We had good people from Denmark, good people from France, and so on, who were on side. And as you heard in that clip that you played, some of the points I made, I appreciated Nigel's amusement sitting in the next seat, but there were people all over the room who were prepared to provide a ripple of applause.
Well, it was certainly entertaining. What was your relationship like with Nigel? I mean, there's no two ways about it. From my perspective, is that the way he articulated himself, the way he put across the arguments. I mean, especially you'll remember that his one-on-one debate with Nick Clegg. I mean, he absolutely ended Nick Clegg's political career, I think. So what was your relationship like with Nigel?
We got on very well. We got on in a very practical way. I remember one of the first important things I did with him before I'd actually crossed the floor. There was we had these weird debates in the European Parliament where some VIP figure appeared and where only the group leaders were permitted to speak. And for reasons of time, you couldn't have everybody speaking. Yeah. But you go around the groups, I think there were about 9 groups, and each group leader got a certain amount of time depending on the size of the group. And we at the time were in the EPP group. This is one of the great disputes that we'd ended up in this group called the European People's Party, which said on its website that it was the motor of European integration. What on earth were we doing as Conservatives? And because it was Conservative policy, and at the time I was a Conservative and wished to remain a Conservative, I accepted membership under protest. And at one point, we were going to have this debate where only the leaders were speaking. And I knew damn fine that the leader of the EPP would speak from an entirely European point of view, and that the alternative position of the Conservative Party, because we had an agreement with them which said that they would respect our alternative position on constitutional questions. But I knew he wouldn't. I knew he wouldn't mention it. Yeah. So I consulted, what was the guy's name? I'm afraid names are getting a bit vague. Wonderful guy who was actually a Labour MEP, Richard somebody or other. Yeah, and he was a noted expert on the rule book. So I dropped him a little line saying, look, I don't get a chance to speak in this in this debate. Is there any way I can get a word in edgeways? And I'll never forget his reply. He just sent me a reply that said, Rule 122, I think it was 122, or just rule and a number. So I looked up the rule and it said, any member during a debate may rise and request to intervene. But he can only intervene if A, the speaker agrees that he can intervene, and B, the president or acting president of the parliament who's chairing the meeting also agrees. So I went and had a private little meeting with Nigel and said, I just want to get a word in edgeways. I know you'll be speaking. I wonder if you mind if I intervene and say something supportive of the Brexit cause. And Nigel thought this was hilarious. So we agreed to do it. And the time came, and of course, because it was a big set piece, everybody was there. And I rose during Nigel's speech and asked to intervene. And Nigel, of course, because we'd agreed it beforehand, said, yeah, by all means. But the acting chairman, the vice chairman of the parliament, Alejo Vidal Quadras, a Spanish guy who I got in with very well, lovely guy, he said, no, you can't. So I was a bit crestfallen because I couldn't see why he was saying that, but I had no option but to sit down. So I sat down until Nigel had finished. And good old Alejo said, okay, Mr. Helmer, now would you like to say your piece? He said, I only declined to allow you to speak while Mr. Farage was speaking in order to save his speaking time for him. And I remember I got up and I made a very aggressive speech about how we were tied at the hip to this EPP group, which took a totally different view, and that our views weren't being expressed, and that the leader of our delegation had failed to attempt to get his point across. And there was absolute fury. And the then leader of the EPP got up immediately after I'd spoken and said, I can always remember it word for word, he said, I've really had enough of that fellow. It's too much. I won't have him in my group anymore. He's fired, or words to that effect. And immediately it was like an ant-heap that somebody had kicked. And quite a number of his assistants and folk gathered round him. And I realized afterwards what they were saying is, sorry, Hansker, it was Hansker Pottering, sorry, Hansker, you can't actually fire somebody on spec like that. You know, you have to have a general meeting of the group and you have to invite the person concerned to express their view. And so on. So this is what happened, and they called a general meeting of the extraordinary general meeting of the EPP to listen to my apology. I had 5 minutes to speak, and I worked quite hard on that speech too. But basically, I went along and said, look, I've only been a member of the EPP as a good Conservative because the Conservative whip said I had to be a member of the EPP. I felt it was absolutely wrong. I think it's wrong for the Conservatives to be part of it. I cannot resign from the EPP because of my commitment to the Conservative Party, but you guys can fire me. Please do so. You're going to have a vote whether to allow me to remain in the EPP or not. I call on you now to vote me out, please. And this caused amazement because, of course, they were expecting me to grovel and apologize. And there was then a short break, and one or two out from other member states, a couple of German guys I remember came by and said, Roger, you don't really want us to vote like that, do you? I said, yes, that's exactly what I want you to do. And sure enough, they did. And I was out, and I was so gratified. And the Conservative Party could hardly withdraw the whip because I had not tried to resign voluntarily.
Yeah. So what did you do? Did you join? Is that when you joined Nigel's group in the Parliament? Or?
No, I ended up as a member of the so-called non-inscrit. There's one group. It's treated administratively as a group, even if it doesn't have any sort of political cohesion, and it's the sort of none of the above group. It's where you end up if you're not a member of another group, and it actually has some advantages in terms of the support you get and so on, and the speaking time that you get. So I was there for quite some time, and then later on, when I joined UKIP, obviously I joined the UKIP group.
The EFDD group, is it?
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah. Okay. So I bet that seems a long time ago now, yeah?
It was. I've been retired, you realise, for about 4 years. So it's nice to just look back from this vantage point and remember the things that happened.
Yeah, you stood down in 2017, yeah?
I did.
I believe Jonathan Bullock took your spot.
He did.
That does seem a long time ago now.
Yeah. One point I would like to make, because the European Parliament was notoriously hostile to Eurosceptics, and they were constantly going through the small print and looking for ways of tripping them up and making accusations. And quite a number of people faced sort of fines of this and fines of that and so on. And I won't go into too much detail, it'll take too long, but I had a member of staff who also worked for the party. They concluded in their wisdom that I was taking the staff allowance from the Parliament in order to support somebody who was working for the party. I wasn't. He was genuinely working 50-50 for me and for the party and being paid 50-50 by me and the party. They absolutely wouldn't accept that. And in the typical underhand style they have, they actually leaked the accusations to the Guardian newspaper.
Oh, there's a shock.
But before they told me about it. And that's not the only time they've done that. I've come across other cases where they've been investigating something going wrong. They've got a favorite journalist whose name escapes me for the moment. But I think I'm being helped here. Jennifer something or other. And so these accusations were made. The result of that and the news coverage was that when I retired, Twitter was alive with people saying, Helmer leaves under a cloud, Helmer forced to leave, Helmer fired from the Parliament, none of which is true. I retired, not resigned, I retired by reason of age. And actually, the same month that I retired, I also had a triple heart bypass, so I think I had a fairly good reason to go. But I chose to retire, and I had discussed with close colleagues in Britain, including Jonathan Bullock, before the previous election. I had said, look, I'm standing for election. I'm very interested in participating, very interested in helping UKIP to win. But at the same time, I don't think I'll go right through till 2019, by which time I would have
already planned
75. It had been planned, it had been discussed. I fully intended to do so. And Jonathan Bullock was jolly glad and grateful when I stepped down and he got the seat, as I intended that he should. There was no dispute at that time about who took over. But it's one of those things, give a dog a bad name and hang it. And still on Twitter, I constantly get people saying, well, you resigned because you had your hand in the till. Not true.
You weren't the only one, I'm sure you know. That the European Parliament did a random audit. Do you remember? They did a random audit. But the only people that they audited were UKIP MEPs. Imagine that.
Yeah,
and
strange, wasn't it?
They could find the tiniest anomaly. It appeared in the newspapers. But unfortunately, as you well know, UKIP are the party that got Britain out of the European Union. It wasn't the Brexit Party. It certainly wasn't. The Brexit Party nailed, put the final nail in the coffin of that relationship. But it was UKIP. It was UKIP all day long. And, well done to you and all of the other UKIP MEPs. I do remember that. I didn't know you then. I've only really known you, haven't I? I would say the last 6 to 8 months. I do
Indeed.
think we met whilst we're in UKIP. Well, look, I'm going to just show this last video, because what I want to understand from you is the climate issue. Why the European Union are pushing, the climate alarmism. You did a speech which I'm going to show now properly. It'll be the right video this time. Just a very short video on high energy prices. Give me your thoughts on this.
Now, Mr. Helmer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Prodi tells us that we should be developing biomass, but of course he must have seen the reports that show that the actual emissions savings consequent on using biomass are much less than previously thought and are extremely disappointing. And at the same time, use of land, of agricultural land for biomass, is very damaging to food prices and food security. Mr. Termes tells us there is nothing we can do about the cost of gas. Now that, Mr. Chairman, is a highly defeatist point of view. We should break out of our European inward-looking mindset and look across the Atlantic at America, where gas prices have halved because they've taken a very positive approach to developing shale gas. We have shale gas in Europe. We should be urgently investigating and exploiting it. The curious thing, Mr. Chairman, is that while we regard America as the bad guys on the environment, in fact, in the last 5 years, their emissions have reduced, and their emissions have reduced because they are switching from coal to much cheaper gas. In the meantime, EU emissions have risen despite all our various policies and our renewables. And an important thing for this committee to get its head round is the fact that renewables, I'm thinking particularly of wind, which is the primary renewable, simply does not save significant emissions. There are several studies, and I can give colleagues details if they're interested, showing that if you take the system of wind plus the necessary conventional fossil fuel backup, which you have to have because the wind is intermittent, you run the backup inefficiently because you run it intermittently, and the total emissions from the system of wind and backup show that the emission savings are somewhere between trivial and zero. And that is why we in Europe, despite all our wind farms, are not in fact reducing emissions at all. And we are driving up energy prices and making Europe hopelessly uncompetitive against America, which has cheap shale gas, China and India, which are building cheap coal-fired power stations very rapidly. It's no good Mr. Rubig asking for youth unemployment to be resolved if we're driving up energy prices and preventing economic growth. And I'd like to conclude, if I may, Mr. Chairman, with a question which colleagues may be able to help me with. But there have been extensive media reports saying that Germany, having foolishly decided to abandon nuclear power, is now in fact building coal-fired power stations in significant numbers. What I cannot understand, and I'm proposing to do a written question to the Commission, I can't understand, given Europe's large combustion plant directive, quite how the Germans are going to get away with building their coal plants. But no doubt that situation will become clearer over the course of time. Thank you very much.
Well, that was back in 2012. I'm sure you remember it well.
I do indeed. It was a time when we were just sort of getting into the climate thing. I think I organized my first conference on climate in the Parliament. I can't really say for sure. It was probably about 2008, and I had some really good people there. I had Lord Lawson. I had Professor Fred Singer from America. I had Roger Bootle, the economist, who very kindly came over and addressed us. But then we could clearly see the economic damage that climate policies were going to do. And I have to say, things have now got worse, because we've now got a British government that's committed itself to net zero. And the costs involved in net zero are absolutely eye-watering. You can't be sure what something's going to cost between now and 2050. But estimates I've seen vary between 1 trillion, that's not million or billion, that's trillion pounds and £3 trillion over that period. But to bring it right home, if you are a householder and you have gas central heating, you are going to be required at some point to change it to, we understand, air source or ground source heat pumps. And that involves huge commitments to insulation, to underfloor heating, probably redecorating the whole house, ripping the carpets up, all those things. And a reasonable estimate for the cost of doing that, the equipment plus the work, is of the order of £30,000 per household. Now, if you go and knock on somebody's door and say the government's introducing a new law that's going to require you to spend £30,000 on climate change, you're going to get a lot of people who are deeply unhappy. And there were headlines literally today, so we are very much up to the minute, headlines in the paper saying that the government is planning massive green taxes, which will raise the price of gas and raise the price of petrol or diesel to make gas central heating and driving cars very, very much more expensive. That is the way it is going. And I see the Conservative Party creating a disaster because people are going to resent it. Everybody wants, if they believe in climate change, everybody wants to solve it. You go to them and say, should we be taking action on climate change? And they say, yes. And you say, do you want to pay another £3,000 per car for your car? Do you want to pay another £2,000 to fly your family to the sun? Do you want to pay thousands upon thousands of pounds to change your home? And they say, no, the government should be worrying about that. We don't want to do it. We don't want to spend the money. And they will not vote for a party that proposes to spend that money. And the Conservative Party looks set to find that out the hard way. People will not tolerate it.
Well, why do you think that? Why do you think this? I mean, this is a Conservative government. If you look at their 2019 manifesto, there's zero commit. There's nothing like that in their manifesto. Nothing in there like that at all. So I think that supports what you're saying. Why would they miss that? You know, why would they leave all of this out that Boris wants us to get to zero? Is it zero by 2030? I think he wants us to get
net zero by 2050, but they want to cancel petrol and diesel cars by 2030. It's going to hit us soon. We can't say, oh, it's nothing till 2050. We don't need to worry about that. The other thing is, you know, they're going to do everything with electricity. So far as I can see, there is absolutely no plan to generate the amount of electricity we need. Already our nuclear program is way behind. Already the available electricity for the grid there's a margin of safety, but the margin of safety is quite small. And suddenly suddenly over a period of a few years, they're going to double our demand for electricity, but they don't know where it's coming from.
But Roger,
madness.
Why? Explain to me, why is it that this government, the Labour Party, why is everyone in power of this mindset? I don't understand why everyone is committed to it.
Well, you start out from the massive establishment, I would say plot. I don't mean plot in the sense of a conspiracy, but there's certainly a consensus amongst the establishment, including academia and media, to keep pushing this panic. We've seen what you can do with panic during the COVID crisis, but they're building the same sort of panic about climate change. As Godfrey Bloom said in a recent tweet, you know, don't believe this climate change stuff. If you're in doubt, just look out of the window. And certainly after the wonderfully cold spring that we've just been enjoying, it's very difficult, I would think, to convince people. And yet people seem to be terrified, especially young people, especially the Greta Thunbergs and the school strikers and these people. You're stealing our future. You know, it doesn't matter to you, as though older people don't care about their grandchildren. So that's the starting point. There is a lot of public concern there, quite unjustified public concern, quite irrational public concern, in my view. But then politicians love to be able to respond. This is something I found right through my political career. If somebody writes to you and says, I am worried about any problem at all, I'm worried about ingrowing toenails, you know, you ought to write back and say, well, thank you for sharing your concern with me, but the NHS is there, it can do a lovely job. That doesn't seem to be a good enough answer. People want you to say, yes, you have a point there. We're going to go out and campaign on this issue of ingrowing toenails. We cannot tolerate the people of Britain not having their toes comfortable in their shoes, and so on and so on. Always we see this. So instead of writing back and saying, well, we understand your concern, but there are different scientific points of view, and we're not prepared to risk vast amounts of money on what is, in effect, a speculative problem, and on solutions. Because it's a two-stage thing. First of all, is it a real problem? Secondly, if it is a real problem, is the activity we're going to undertake to solve the problem actually going to solve the problem? In my view, it's wrong on both counts. It isn't a major problem. The world has got slightly warmer, about 1 degree warmer in the last 100 years. That is not untypical. The climate changes quite naturally by itself. But secondly, the things we are doing will not work. We plunge into renewables, as I was mentioning in that clip you showed. And yet there are studies showing that by the time you've chopped down trees in America and you've pelleted the trees, and you carried the pellets down to the port and stuck them on a ship and brought them across the Atlantic and trucked them up to Drax and burned them, you've actually emitted just as much CO2 as you would have done for the same amount of energy if you'd burned coal to start with. The only difference is coal we have under the ground in England and in Scotland, and the trees come from America, and we're supposed to be promoting growth of trees, not chopping them down. So the logic is just bizarre. Now, the other thing, and one hates to be personal about the Prime Minister, but he does seem to have been got at by his ultra-green new wife. Now, I don't know what conversations they have in the bedroom and when they're not arguing about spilling red wine on the white sofa, but I am convinced that she will make his life a misery, and perhaps has already, unless he pursues this green nonsense. And it will cost the country dear, but it will cost the Conservative Party dear too, because they are not conservative. What you've been pointing out, Dan, quite rightly, is these are not conservative policies. Conservatives, well, if you read Lord Lawson's wonderful book about climate change, where he urges us to think in terms of adaptation. In other words, if the world gets warmer, there are things we can do to adapt to it. We can build sea walls, we can buy air conditioning, we can do all those things. And it may not happen. And if it doesn't happen, we won't have spent trillions of pounds to prevent something that wasn't going to happen to start with. That's a conservative approach, to wait and see, be prepared, have plans in place. If a problem arises, we will deal with the problem. Fine, we've seen it coming. We know we may have to do something. It is not a conservative solution to say we will spend trillions of pounds now in the hope that it has an effect. I mean, you never know whether it worked. You can guarantee we spend trillions of pounds now. In 50 years' time, people are saying, well, thank God we spent all that money because it hasn't got warmer. And what they don't realize is that it wouldn't have got warmer anyway.
Well, we've got, when you talk about the Conservative Party, it's a bit of a bone of contention for me, because the Conservative Party are not conservative. Boris Johnson, I think Boris Johnson's politics flow like a flag in the wind. You know what I mean? I think he's a very clever man, but at the same time very stupid, because you're right. You're right. Ever since Boris Johnson went into hospital with COVID-19, he was quite poorly. We were told he was on death's door, but he never came out of that hospital. We've got someone else came out of that hospital that looks like him, because every time he opens his mouth, you would think it was an Extinction Rebellion or a Green Party, public broadcasting. There's nothing conservative at all. You've got all of the far left, pulling down of statues, the culture wars, critical race theory. All of this has gone on. Now, this is more about the party than it is Boris. We've had 11 years of a conservative government, and we're turning more into I'm exaggerating, but it feels like we're turning more into North Korea, more like a chapter out of Orwell's 1984. Twitter police. If they don't like what you put, someone says they don't like what you put on Twitter, you could get a knock on your door from the police to check your thinking. I mean, this is. I still can't grasp that that's the reality of the country that we're living in now, under an alleged Conservative Party government.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, just thinking back to the old Boris, the pre-hospital Boris,
Yeah.
he was saying, I'm damned if I'm going to have people telling the public what to think. We don't do that kind of thing. He read the sort of articles he was writing. He was very libertarian in his approach.
Yeah.
And in those days, the Conservative Party was wedded to what the Americans called Jeffersonian principles. Low taxes, limited government, personal freedom, those issues. I'm not sure the American Republican Party is necessarily clinging to them, but certainly in Johnson's case, they've been blown out of the window. The fundamental principles of a conservative society have been lost. And really, we've got two big social democrat parties.
Well, exactly that. We've got the far left in the Labour Party, and we've got the left-wing Tory Party. I was talking with a prominent member of former member of the ERG group, Conservative MP, and he said something to me just very blasé. That UKIP were needed to keep my party to the right, and I just thought, and it hit me. It didn't hit me straight away as I digested it, and I went, "So your party are left wing?" No, they're not. Well, if you need a party to keep you centre right, aren't you left wing? Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, if the best we could do in UKIP was to keep the Conservative Party honest, it would have been a worthwhile job. I think the job we did to achieve Brexit was a more important job.
Yeah.
No, there isn't really a Conservative Party. And I don't see a solution. We talked at another time about these small parties and what chance they have. And I think my reply was, UKIP succeeded because it was one big issue that people were aware of and conscious of and becoming angry about. So they rallied round that flag. But how we get sensible economic policy and conservative values in a new party, I'm afraid I don't know. I don't have a solution. I wish I did.
Well, just before we finish, let me pitch this to you, because I've been thinking about this as well. I've been following Lawrence Fox quite a lot. I've been to his house a few times. I really, really like him. As you know, he started the Reclaim Party after appearing on BBC Question Time in January of last year, and obviously he's then suffered the cancel culture tactics. But I've been following him. But one of the things that keeps jumping out to me every time I put on a mainstream media, radio, TV channel, I constantly get the feeling that we're bad, white man bad, England bad, not Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. It's Britain is bad, England is bad. That I constantly get that feeling, and I've got a funny feeling that. The British people and the people of England are very, we take a lot of stick. We take a lot. But I think this COVID-19 may be, as things start to unfold as time goes on, I think that there's an opportunity now to oust one of those parties. Because again, for me, if it wasn't for the two-party state, I think there would be another opposition party now, and not Labour. I think Labour would have split it three ways.
Yeah, I think you could be right. Earlier today, I was watching GB News, and Alexandra Phillips, who's a presenter there now, but was a press officer with UKIP in my time.
She was a Brexit MEP, wasn't she?
Sorry?
She was a Brexit Party MEP.
No, she was. Yeah, she was a Brexit Party MEP, but of course I wasn't an MEP at the time, so that isn't so fixed in my mind. But she's an ace girl, but she was making a point that I thought was interesting. If you look at working class people, if you look at the red wall seats, you find that patriotism is actually not a dirty word with them. They're ecstatic about the performance of the British football team. You drive through a council estate and you see St. George's flags everywhere. For them, patriotism is natural and it's part of civil society. It's only when you get up to the establishment that they sneer at patriotism. And I don't know why. It's been like this for a century. I mean, George Orwell famously said that England is the only country in the world whose leaders despise their own nation. I haven't got those words exactly right, but that was basically what he said.
Well, it's certainly
it was true then.
Yeah,
I think it's true now, and it's tragic. Why? There's nothing wrong with patriotism. Of course, we don't want the sort of blood and soil patriotism that was represented by fascists in Europe in the Second World War. But a proper pride and support and enthusiasm for your country shouldn't only come out for football matches. It's something that we should be that should just be a natural reaction. After all, we are a country together in the same island, and what benefits some of us should benefit all of us. And if England or Great Britain does well, then that is good for the British people. And why people should feel badly about that, I don't know. I think it's getting clearer and clearer that as a result of Brexit, despite some bumps in the road, some wobbles on the way, a lot of good things are happening, not least the Nissan investment in Sunderland. Of course.
Yeah, that's really good.
But good things are happening. That is good for our whole country. It's good for Leavers and it's good for Remainers. And we should be proud of what we are achieving as a country. And it's tragic that there are so many people in positions of influence and authority who don't seem to share that view.
Well, I think it's, for me, Douglas Murray put it very, very succinctly in an interview I had recently, that Britain is constantly put down for its past. Anything that we did wrong in the past, we should all feel guilty for it for today. They want to dismantle our history and rewrite it. But I think we need to take a step back and have a look. Where at the moment in the world, which country is better than the United Kingdom with our national health system, our not so perfect justice system, but still it's better than 95% of the planet. Where is better? We're constantly seeing, on the BBC, Sky, putting Britain down. But where do they want to go? Where do they want us? Or what do they want us to be like?
Well, we're constantly told that we're racist, and if we don't think we're racist, that shows we're unconsciously biased. But I was reading a recent study across the whole of Europe on social attitudes, and it turned out that Britain was regarded by the European public as the least racist country in Europe, and I think that's probably fair. I think we've got all sorts of ethnic minorities in responsible positions, including a big chunk of the cabinet. But this sort of white privilege thing, I thought it was best summed up by somebody who said, well, what they want for people who have never owned slaves to pay reparations to people who have never been slaves. History is history. We're not going to sue the Italians for Julius Caesar invading the country in, where was it, 57 BC or something. Some things have to be consigned to history. And the same people who are concerned about slavery 300 years ago seem entirely unconcerned about slavery amongst the Uyghurs in China and human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia and other countries. So they're so concerned about historic wrongs and grievances that they're not prepared even to look at current wrongs and grievances.
I think you and I both know why. It's because it's disingenuous. That's not really their end game. It's not really their motive. It's a Marxist-driven, ideology, but it's a chink in an armor that they keep chipping away at. Yeah,
destroying society.
Now, for one, I'm sick of hearing about it. And with regards to GB News, I'm pleasantly surprised. I was very skeptical, but I like what I'm seeing so far. I really like it.
Yeah, I'm pleased. I think they need a bit more news. I find myself watching the chat on GB News and then switching across to the BBC to find out what's happened. And that shouldn't be the case. Somebody on Twitter today said they ought to do 15 minutes of news and then 45 minutes of chat. That would be a better balance, in my view, but they'll get there.
I think it's their fledgling stage, isn't it? I think that'll be eventually where they move to, but let's wait and see. Look, Roger, I'm going to end it there because we've been an hour and 10 minutes.
We've gone on a bit. I apologise.
No, not at all. It's been, there's loads of stuff I've missed out, but we could sit here. We could sit here all night. But I've got a takeaway calling me.
Okay, that's great. Super.
Roger,
well, thanks for
inviting
inviting
me. So much for your time, and for all the work that you put in to getting this country out of the European Union, because I think a lot of you guys, you know, as well as the activists, as well as the grassroots, are completely wiped from the establishment's memory books of who took this country out of the European Union. So, you know, for me, myself, thank you very much for all of the work that you put in.
Well, you've got a great project there, Dan, and I commend you for doing it. I look forward to seeing the result.
Thank you very much. I'm learning technical issues, and my mind keeps going blank when I want to ask questions, but I'll get there. I'll learn. Roger, thank you so much for your time. And thank you to your editor and technical producer, Sheila, in the background.
Right.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.